Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 15 based on novel. So let's start. Inside the Saint Tower, Ju Yuan lifted his head, astonishment involuntarily appearing on his face, as he gazed upon the seemingly endless majestic mountain that had appeared before his eyes. The giant mountain gave off a sacred glow, faint mists swirling around it. The peak was hidden in the mists that no one present was able to peer through. 38 figures stood on Genesis Chi as they floated at the foot of the mountain, their heads tilted upwards to gaze upon it. To their front was an enormous stone staircase. Every step was taller than a person, and the steps continuously extended upwards all the way to the ends of one's sight. From a distance, it looked akin to a coiling green dragon. The stone was old and discolored, and seemed to contain a mysterious aura. This was also the only path to the mountain peak on the entire Saint Mountain. It seems that to obtain the greatest blessing, we can only ascend the peak via this stone staircase. Luluo cupped her hands over her eyes, as she gazed at the seemingly endless giant stone staircase. Ju Yuan also stared at the stone staircase and said, "I'm afraid that it will not be so easy to pass through this stone staircase." With his spirit senses, he could faintly feel dangerous undulations from it. The others nodded. Although their spirit senses were not as sharp as Ju Yuan's, anyone would understand after some thought. How could the final test be easy? The Saint Tower is fading. Zuoqiu Qingyu suddenly cried out in shock. Ju Yuan and the rest raised their heads. Sure enough, they saw the Saint Tower they had entered begin to turn transparent. As such, the scenery inside was soon exposed to the numerous geniuses watching outside. Though the tower had become transparent, it still existed as if protecting the Saint Mountain. This change also landed in the eyes of the countless geniuses in the Saint Remains domain, causing them to explode into numerous cries of surprise. Is that the interior of the Saint Tower? Could that mountain be the final test to enter the sacred grounds? It seems rather simple, no? How can the final test be easy? Just wait and see, things should get exciting soon. The countless whispers outside were naturally not heard by those inside the tower. What's more, all of their attention was currently on the mysterious staircase. 38 figures temporarily fell silent. The silence lasted for quite some time, before someone's patience finally hit its limit. He flew forward with extreme caution, and landed on the stone staircase. The geniuses on the step protected his body with his Genesis Chi. However, no traps appeared like everyone had expected. The one on the step was completely safe. He's fine. The genius was stunned for a moment, before his eyes lit up with joy. His figure moved again, beginning to climb the enormous stone steps. His actions sparked everyone else into movement. They gritted their teeth, landing one after another on the stone steps with swishing wind sounds. Upon seeing this, Ju Yuan looked towards Yao Yao and the rest as he said, "We should go too. Everyone be careful. This place is likely not so simple." The rest of the gang naturally nodded. Thus, their group also moved, landing on the giant stone staircase. In less than a minute, everyone had arrived on the stone steps. Next, they very carefully leaped into the air, climbing step after step as they swiftly ascended. Seems that there is really no danger. Nothing happened after several minutes. One of the geniuses could no longer wait, Genesis Chi exploding beneath his feet as his speed rapidly rose. He darted up like a shadow, crossing a dozen steps in a short few breaths. Luluo was also a little unable to hold back upon seeing this, intending to increase her speed too. Just as her figure was about to burst forward, however, Ju Yuan grabbed her wrist. He raised his head and looked towards the end of the stone steps and said, "Something's wrong. Don't be rash." The moment Ju Yuan's words faded, everyone faintly felt the land tremble slightly. Yao Yao stared at the end of the steps and suddenly said, "Something's coming down." Ju Yuan's eyes widened a little. He took a closer look and sure enough, he caught sight up green light pouring down from the end of the stone steps. Rumble. The shaking of the land grew more and more obvious. Soon, Ju Yuan and the rest were finally able to get a clear view. A green flood was crashing down from the end of the steps. The green flood was boundless, endless, as if everything would be destroyed when it passed through. It's the Genesis Chi flood. Ju Yuan's pupils shrank, a sliver of shock and alarm in his voice. When such a vast Genesis Chi flood crashed downwards, it was an earth-shaking sight. In the face of the flood, Zhu Yuan and the rest were aimed to ants. Zhu Yuan's expression was grave as he urgently shouted, "Quick, avoid or defend." Boom. By this time, the green Genesis Chi flood had already arrived. The genius at the very front was the first to face it. All he had time for was a miserable shriek. Though he had immediately summoned his Genesis Chi to defend, he was instantly swept away by the flood, ultimately washed off the stone steps as the flood continued to surge past. The green flood did not stop, wrapping around him as a part of it blasted out of the Saint Tower and threw him towards the Saint Remains domain. His be thrown out of the Saint Tower. An icy sensation filled everyone's hearts when they saw this. It turns out that you will lose the right to contest for the greatest blessing if you leave the stone steps. Now, no one dared to hold any more contempt for the steps. Rumble. The flood rapidly expanded in Zhu Yuan's eyes. With a deep breath, a rune appeared on his palm, light erupting from it as it transformed into a 10 feet tall tortoise shell light rune. Grade 3 Genesis rune, Mighty Tortoise Shell. His foot also slammed into the ground, Genesis Chi surging below his soles to glue him to the ground. The moment Zhu Yuan was finished, the green flood arrived. It slammed into the tortoise shell rune, immediately causing it to shake violently. An indescribable force pushed Zhu Yuan's feet a whole step back, but instantly steeled himself and persistently endured. What a frightening assault. Veins popped up on his forehead as dark gold Genesis Chi began to surge out of his body, pushing back against the endless, limitless force. It felt like a tsunami was crushing him while walking on the stone steps. It is indeed not going to be easy to reach the peak. I don't even dare to let my attention stray, let alone ascending to the top, which I can't even see yet. Zhu Yuan let out a bitter laugh. His gaze did a quick scan. Nearby, Luluo, Zhuqiu, Zhenshu and the rest were using their own means to endure the battering of the green flood. Further to the front, Wu Huang, Yi Ming, Li Chunjun and the rest were also engaging various methods. Miserable shrieks could be heard from time to time, indicating someone was no longer able to endure, and had been washed straight out of the Saint Tower by the flood. I need to first get used to this green flood before I think about climbing. Zhu Yuan gradually calmed down, but his expression abruptly changed a split second later. His gaze urgently swept around the place, because he had realized he was unable to find Yaoiro's figure on the stone steps. Had she been washed out of the tower by the green flood? On the giant stone steps, Zhu Yuan's expression was pretty ugly, his brows tightly furrowed. Although Yao Yao has no Genesis Chi, it's impossible for her to have been blown away immediately. Zhu Yuan's eyes flickered in thought. Yaoiro's methods were akin to a bottomless pit. There was no way that she would have been pushed out so easily. But if Yao Yao had been able to resist, why was her figure suddenly missing from the stone steps? What the hell is going on? Zhu Yuan tightly clenched his jaw. Yao Yao was clearly carrying numerous secrets, many of which he was unable to know. However, he still wanted to do his best to protect her. It was his promise to Master Kang Yuan. And yet, Yao Yao had fallen into danger time and time again, a fact that Zhu Yuan undoubtedly blamed himself for. While Zhu Yuan was distracted, cracks gradually appeared on the tortoise shell, a sign that it was about to reach its limit. The terrifying force continued to flood towards him, pushing Zhu Yuan's body back step by step. In the short span of a dozen breaths, Zhu Yuan had been pushed to the back of the group, almost about to be swept off the stone stairs. Luluo's sharp eyes spotted this and hurriedly cried out to warn him, "Zhu Yuan, don't be distracted." Zhuqiu, whom had been pushed towards another direction by the green flood, also spoke up in a chiding manner, "Don't worry, Yao Yao will be fine. You should know her capabilities." Zhu Yuan took in a deep breath and nodded. If Yao Yao was only swept out of the tower, it was still okay, because she would at least be fine. But if it was some other scenario, he had a hunch that he needed to conquer the Saint Mountain to find out what happened to her. Dark gold Genesis Chi slowly rose from Zhu Yuan's body, as his sliding feet slowly came to a stop. He raised his head and looked to his front. The 3 dozen or so geniuses that had entered the tower had already been split into several distinct groups by the first wave of green. At the very front was naturally Wu Huang, Yi Ming, Li Chunjun and the rest. Wu Huang was the first. Scarlet-red Genesis Chi ferociously exploded from his body, the powerful Genesis Chi stopping even the pouring green flood for a brief moment. Wu Huang extended a hand as scarlet-red Genesis Chi gathered on his palm. It eventually took the shape of a foot-wide glowing scarlet-red ball, extremely astonishing Genesis chi ripples concentrated within it. Scorching heat pulsed, burning even the surrounding air. When the green flood battered against the scarlet-red ball, sizzling noises could be heard as the former was swiftly evaporated. Wu Huang held up the scarlet-red ball, feet steady as he walked forward, climbing up step by step. While he advanced, he glanced towards the back of the pack at Zhu Yuan as contempt appeared from the corners of his mouth. The gap between the two of them was clearly beginning to show. He paid no further attention to the latter, and concentrated on climbing the stone steps. Vortexes seemed to swirl within Yiming's black pupils. He reached out both hands to the front as black Genesis chi transformed into swirling vortexes on his palm. The green flood automatically parted when it encountered the black vortexes, as if being pushed aside, leaving a gap for Yiming to advance. When he did this, however, black blood began to flow from the corners of his eyes. Li Chunjun gripped his black greatsword and swung downwards. Formidable sword aura swept forth, slicing open a half-foot-long crack in the green flood. Li Chunjun advanced in this manner, swing, step, step. Ha ha, this is great. Ning Zhon heartily laughed at the sky. Vigorous Genesis chi rose from his body as it suddenly swelled a size bigger, making him look even more like a human-shaped ape. His method was the most barbaric, his strong body withstanding the force of the flood as he walked up the stone steps. The four of them were at the very front, undoubtedly displaying their overwhelming strength. The numerous geniuses behind involuntarily licked their lips in secret, as they gazed upon the backs of these four individuals. We can't let them steal all our thunder. I'm going to show my skills too. Luluo giggled when she saw this. Her small face soon turned serious. With a shake of a flash of blue light flew out and landed on her shoulder. It was Little Frost, the ice bird that had the Ice Phoenix bloodline. Likely due to the connection it had to Luluo, Little Frost had not been expelled from the light pillar when it descended like Tunton. Luluo opened her mouth as icy Genesis chi was blown out. The ice bird also opened its sharp beak at the same time, spitting out a bundle of icy Genesis chi. The two Genesis chi weaved together and landed on the green flood in front of them. A patch of the flood immediately froze, transforming into ice that extended dozens of feet. Luluo's toes pushed off the ground as she leaped forward. Hey Zhu Yuan, I'm going too. You can only depend on yourself now. Whether or not you catch up will hinge on your ability. Zuo Qingyu looked towards Zhu Yuan, a mischievous smile revealing itself on her alluring face. Since Yao Yao is not around, if you're able to catch up to me, I may consider letting you be one of the candidates. Candidate? What candidate? Zhu Yuan was taken aback. Zuo Qingyu let out a tinkling laugh, but did not answer. Her slender body twisted as she dashed straight into the green flood, like a swimming black carp, as she climbed upwards. Zhu Yuan, although I am indebted to you, I cannot give way to you here. I'll be going ahead first. I hope that you'll soon catch up. Zhen Shu's raspy voice sounded. Grey Genesis chi spiraled around his body. His hands came together, as the Genesis chi between his palms seemed to transform into a skull. The skull opened its mouth, and began to suck in the green flood while Zhen Shu took this opportunity to dash forward. All three were apex-level geniuses. Now that they decided to use their full power, their speeds immediately soared, beginning to catch up to the first group of Wu Huang and the rest. Behind them were the many second-tier geniuses, such as Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yu Ling. Xiao Qianxuan's coldly glanced at Zhu Yuan, who was all the way behind, as a sneer appeared from the corners of his lips. Ji Yu Ling's eyes also contained hints of mockery. Humph, you can only rely on the power of your own Genesis chi in order to advance through this flood. Zhu Yuan's battle power may be decent, but he is after all only at the Heaven Gate stage. The fact that his foundations cannot compare to our own has now been shown. They naturally did not know that Zhu Yuan was distracted by Yao Eiro's disappearance, believing instead that his Genesis chi reserves were waning, hence causing him to be forced back. Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yu Ling exchanged a look, seeing the joy in each other's eyes. So what if his battle power was overwhelming? If he could not pass this stage, all of Zhu Yuan's previous efforts would be wasted. Zhu Yuan took in a deep breath, suppressing the worry in his heart. He was not an indecisive person, and knew that worrying now was useless anyways. The most important thing now was to first ascend the Saint Mountain. His gaze peered past the green flood, looking towards the front where Wu Huang's figure continued to climb as an icy light surged in his eyes. Since that is so. His body lowered slightly, like a panther that was about to pounce on its prey. Let's have a good competition to see who will reach the peak first. Dark gold Genesis Chi abruptly exploded from Zhu Yuan's body like an erupting volcano at this moment. Saint remains domain. Countless geniuses gazed at the majestic Saint Mountain inside the Saint Tower. They were naturally also able to see the green flood that poured down from the endless stone steps. Even from so far away, they could still clearly feel its dreadful power. Under the surging green flood, the geniuses within were akin to ants. Wu Huang, Yi Ming, Li Chunjun and the rest are pretty amazing. Can't believe that they've adapted so quickly and have already begun their steady advance forward. As expected of these apex-level geniuses, there is clearly a gap between them and the others. Many whispers could be heard. Numerous individuals also noticed Zhu Yuan, whom was dead last. After all, his performance in the Saint Remains domain had been extremely attention-grabbing. What's up with Zhu Yuan? To think that's his fallen to last place. Zhu Yuan is only at the Heaven Gate stage. His explosive power is pretty good, but his Genesis Chi cultivation is unable to match the others. That's why his performance is so lackluster. From the looks of it, it will not be long before he is washed out of the tower and loses his qualifications. It's already amazing for him to have reached this stage. Several individuals were gloating at Zhu Yuan's performance. They had been unable to enter the Saint Tower to vie for the blessing within, and naturally felt a little better seeing someone struggle inside. Outside the Saint Remains domain, the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan, watched the first group, his eyes staying on Wu Huang in particular, as a satisfied smile surfaced on his face. Good. Wu Huang, continue bravely advance towards the peak in this manner. If you want to join the Sacred Palace, you'll have to crush all the other geniuses and become the strongest one. With a slight smile on his face, Zhao Pan's gaze shifted downwards a little, landing on the figure at the back of the pack. The corners of his lips immediately lifted slightly in a mocking manner. What a useless person, he's unworthy of being Wu Huang's foe. He secretly shook his head. This brat, what the heck is he doing? The Tsangshuan sect envoy, Mu Wuji, was gently tapping his pipe, a frown on his face as he watched Zhu Yuan's figure. Although it was true that one needed to rely on one's Genesis Chi to resist the green flood, Mu Wuji did not believe that this was where Zhu Yuan would be stopped in his tracks. Zhu Yuan, that old mister thinks so highly of you, so you'd better buck up. Or how am I going to explain things when I return? Mu Wuji sucked on his pipe as smoke drifted out from his nose, his expression turning solemn within the rising smoke. Almost immediately after, however, Mu Wuji's eyes suddenly focused. At the same time, the other 5 envoys also gasped softly. All of their sharp eyes had seen powerful gold Genesis Chi suddenly erupt from Zhu Yuan's body at this moment. The strength of this Genesis Chi was in no way weaker than those geniuses who had stepped into the Alpha Origin stage. Mu Wuji's eyes brightened as he cursed with a grin, stinking brat, to think that he was acting weak. However, he too did not know that Zhu Yuan had no such intentions. It was purely Yaoero's disappearance that made him lose himself for a while, resulting in him being pushed to the last spot by the green flood. Kid, show me your true capabilities. Let's see why that old mister has so highly recommended you. Rumble. On a stone step, dark gold Genesis Chi spouted out from Zhu Yuan's body like an erupting volcano. Along with it came a tremendous power that flowed throughout his body and into his limbs. Although Zhu Yuan was currently at the mid-Heaven Gate stage, with regards to the power and abundance of Genesis Chi, he would not falter even when directly facing a true Alpha Origin expert. After all, his Genesis Chi had been able to reach a height of over 400 feet, when he reached the Heaven Gate stage, a height that could match numerous advanced Heaven Gate practitioners. With his blood-red Chi dwelling, the Omnipython Chi, and the steps he had taken in his cultivation since then, the current him would not fear a true Alpha Origin even in a head-on clash of Genesis Chi. Boom. Dark gold Genesis Chi roared around Zhu Yuan. The green flood charged towards him again, but a foot-long crack was torn open within it by the dark gold Genesis Chi. Zhu Yuan took a sudden step forward as his figure rapidly shot forth. The green flood before him was rapidly ripped apart, a muffled thump echoing each time Genesis Chi smashed into Genesis Chi. Under countless shocked gazes, Zhu Yuan's feet crossed stair after stair as he swiftly dashed upwards. So fast. Countless cries of surprise erupted in the Saint Remains domain. In their eyes, Zhu Yuan seemed to have transformed into a flash of dark gold light, breaking through layer after layer of the green flood as he continuously passed the geniuses in front of him. In a short span of a dozen breaths, Zhu Yuan had climbed over 100 steps, directly leaping from his original last position to rapidly closing in on the second-tier group. Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yuling also sensed the activity behind them. Their gazes swept over only for shock to immediately fill their faces. Zhu Yuan had already appeared a short distance behind them. That bastard, is he on drugs? How did he suddenly become so fierce? Xiao Qianxuan's expression had turned pretty ugly. He had originally believed Zhu Yuan's lack of Genesis Qi was the reason why he had fallen so far behind. Yet, it was now clear that his Genesis Qi was no weaker than an Alpha Origin expert. His merely putting on a false front, bringing out all the Genesis Qi in his body in one go. His momentum may seem to be unstoppable, but he will not be able to keep this up for long. Ji Yuling sneered. Such actions are truly foolish. We can't even see the end of these stairs. Who knows how long it'll take to reach the top? His rash actions will soon lead to the exhaustion of his Genesis Qi, and when that happens, he will be washed out of the Saint Tower, losing his qualifications. She had a deep grudge with Zhu Yuan, and naturally did not want to see the latter succeed. Hence, most of her thoughts were related to Zhu Yuan's suffering to ease the resentment in her heart. Xiao Qianxian nodded. He had been greatly tormented by the dragon's resentment poison Zhu Yuan had previously sent into his and Ji Yuling's bodies. If not for Wu Huang's help, they would have likely been tortured to death. Fortunately, their misfortune had led to luck. They had managed to obtain some blessings, through which they managed to gain the right to enter the Saint Tower. As such thoughts flashed past in his head, Xiao Qianxian looked towards Zhu Yuan's rapidly approaching figure, intending to wait for the latter's miserable appearance after using up his Genesis Qi. However, what Xiao Qianxian waited for was never going to happen. Zhu Yuan's expression was calm, not even glancing in their direction. Dark gold Genesis Qi surged, continuously smashing apart the incoming green flood, while his fast and steady footsteps continued to zoom past the stone steps below his feet. There were now only a dozen steps between him and the second-tier group. Xiao Qianxuan's and Ji Yuling's expressions had already turned a little ugly, however, Zhu Yuan ignored the two of them, his steps swift and powerful. In a mere 2 minutes, his figure abruptly straightened as he reached the second-tier group amidst countless cries of shock, now walking shoulder to shoulder with Xiao Qianxian, Ji Yuling and the rest amidst. Zhu Yuan did not see the astonished gazes that were now directed towards him, but instead lifted his head and looked to the front. Several hundred steps away was the swiftly ascending first group, consisting of Wu Huang and the other apex-level geniuses. Luluo, Zhuo Qingyu and Zhen Shu were also closely following behind them. At this time, the gap between the geniuses was gradually being revealed. The first group of apex-level geniuses was gradually leaving the latter groups further and further behind, a sight that gave rise to despair. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. He had already fallen a step behind earlier, so a greater amount of energy was clearly needed to catch up. A breath was expelled from Zhu Yuan's mouth as the expression in his eyes turned extremely serious. Dark gold Genesis Qi tinged with slivers of blood-colored light poured out from his body. A split second later, his foot slammed into the ground as his body shot forward, barbarically tearing through the flood in front of him. Xiao Qianxian, Ji Yuling and the rest were dumbstruck by Zhu Yuan's instantaneous burst of speed. Only now did they realize that Zhu Yuan had still been holding back earlier. How can this be? He is only at the Heaven Gate stage. Howled Xiao Qianxian in his heart as a feeling of defeat rose within him. No one paid any attention to his frustration, however, because the numerous geniuses were blankly staring at Zhu Yuan's figure. Dark gold Genesis Qi churned around him, seemingly transforming him into a giant golden python. The giant python bravely advanced through the pouring green flood, as if there was a dragon gate to the front that would grant it a complete transformation. Boom. For an instant, it seemed as if the green flood had frozen for a single breath. In short few minutes, the gap of several hundred steps had been crossed by Zhu Yuan's feet. Such activity was naturally detected by the first group of apex-level geniuses. They immediately turned their heads, only to be stunned by rapidly approaching giant golden python that was Zhu Yuan. This guy. A startled look was revealed on Yiming's face. What an interesting person, mumbled Li Chunjun. A mere Heaven Gate stage has actually managed to catch up to us. This kid is extraordinary. Ning Zhon also exclaimed in amazement. While cutting through the flood at full speed, Luluo cheered, "Go Zhu Yuan." So he really has caught up, this guy does have some ability. Zuqiu Qingyu's mouth hung slightly open, surprise on her pretty face. At the very front, Wu Huang also turned his head slightly, staring at the swiftly approaching golden figure as an eerily cold light flitted across his eyes. "Zhu Yuan, are you really in such a hurry to die?" Zhu Yuan's figure broke through the merciless green flood like a giant golden python, as he rapidly advanced, giant step after step passing under his feet. Zhu Yuan had displayed an astonishing explosive power in the past few minutes. From last place, he had leaped past the second-tier group, and was now beginning to close in on the first group. Such a turn of events naturally caused waves of uproars outside the Saint Remains domain. Everyone knew that to advance against the endlessly pouring green flood, one needed to rely on one's Genesis Chi. If one's Genesis Chi cultivation was insufficient, it would result in the exhaustion of Genesis Chi and the subsequent ejection from the tower. However, Zhu Yuan's explosive display of power had yet to show any signs of waning, but was instead growing more and more ferocious. A sight that made countless people dumbstruck. How can this be? He's merely at the Heaven Gate stage. How can he possess such an abundance of Genesis Chi? Numerous geniuses were unable to wrap their minds around it. Outside the Saint Remains domain, a relieved smile emerged on Mu Wuji's originally slightly grim face. His gaze continued to be glued to the figure in the mirror as he mumbled to himself, "Such abundant Genesis Chi at the Heaven Gate stage, this means that the grade of his Chi dwelling is definitely pretty high. It is at the very minimum the purple level, or even the gold level. If so, I wonder what grade is that gold Chi dwelling? A gold Chi dwelling, no wonder that old Mr. thinks so highly of him." Mu Wujin laughed. Although having a higher grade Chi dwelling was not a definite guarantee of one's future accomplishments, it was still an advantage over those at the same level, while also an indicator of one's talent. Mu Wuji's mood became pretty good. He shot a glance at the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan, as he said with a wide grin, "It seems that your eyes don't work properly quite often." The former had seen the disdain in the latter's eyes earlier when he was looking at Zhu Yuan. Zhao Pan was expressionless. "Don't celebrate too early. So what if he catches up? If he truly angers Wu Huang, he won't be able to walk out of this alive." Mu Wuji tapped his pipe. "I have the feeling that things won't turn out as you envision." Zhao Pan laughed mockingly, his tone chilling as he said, "I hope that you will be able to say so when that kid is killed by Wu Huang." Mu Wuji coldly chuckled as he turned his gaze back to the mirror. "We'll wait and see." Rumble. The seemingly endless green flood continued to pour downwards. Made from Genesis Chi, its destructive power would easily sweep away even mountains. At this current moment, there were about 36 figures on the endless stone stairs that were bitterly struggling as they pushed forward against the green flood. It was also at this moment that Zhu Yuan's figure truly joined the first-tier group. Currently, Wu Huang, Yi Ming, Li Chunjun and the rest were at the very front, roughly a gap of 10 steps in between them, while the other apex-level geniuses were slightly further back. After entering the first group, Zhu Yuan's crazy speed finally began to slow. Sweat appeared on his forehead, a sign that his earlier explosion of power had been extremely taxing on him. If not for his blood-red Chi dwelling and plentiful Genesis Chi within it, he would have been out of juice long ago, and be swept away by the green flood. But even so, a great portion of the Genesis Chi in his Chi dwelling had already been spent. As such, he chose not to maintain the same output as before, slowing his speed instead to recover Genesis Chi. After all, no one knew what would happen next. Zhu Yuan mind calmed as he lifted his head and gazed at the seemingly endless steps. His breathing began to turn long and drawn out, his chest shrinking back slightly with each inhalation. The Genesis Chi around transformed into string of white that was sucked into his body. Dragon breath technique. This was also why Zhu Yuan had dared to neglect his Genesis Chi consumption earlier. The main reason behind his explosive burst previously was because he could rapidly recover the used Genesis Chi in an extremely short period through the power of the Dragon Breath technique. As such, the Genesis Chi surging around him soon became robust again. This astonished the numerous gazed on Zhu Yuan. Many had originally been under the assumption that due to his earlier burst of power, Zhu Yuan would not last for long and soon be washed away. Who could have expected that his recovery speed would surpass their imaginations, allowing him to quickly stabilize his position in the first-tier group. The green flood tirelessly crashed down. As time passed, everyone began to feel the flood gradually grow stronger. This realization caused the expressions of even those numerous apex-level geniuses of the first group to grow increasingly grave. Because their Genesis Chi consumption was rising. However, there was still no end to be seen to the stone stairs. Another incense sticks of time unknowingly passed by. Rumble. Zhu Yuan suddenly frowned slightly as he looked up. He seemed to have felt a faint tremble a moment earlier. Zhu Yuan's pupils abruptly tightened a split second later, as his expression changed drastically. He had just seen a giant 100 feet tall wave rise some distance to their front, creating a giant shadow as it ruthlessly towered over them. The giant green wave was also composed purely of Genesis Chi. Its presence alone was enough to know how terrifying it would be. The sudden appearance of the giant wave made Wu Huang, Yi Ming and the rest's expressions change. It was too abrupt, and even they were caught off guard. Rumble. By the time they hurriedly strengthened their Genesis Chi, the giant green wave had already mercilessly slammed into them. That instantaneous explosion of power was several times the magnitude of before. Boom. The powerful force caused even the bodies of Wu Huang and the others at the front to jerk back violently, as they were rapidly pushed back. Fortunately, their solid foundations enabled them to forcibly stop being themselves to a stop. The apex-level geniuses behind them were also struck, each one forced to desperately grab onto the ground. A piercing shriek was heard as the huge wave slammed down. Zhu Yuan lifted his gaze and saw Zhuo Qingyu's body being flung away. Her movement technique was extremely high class, allowing her to avoid most of the force, but the huge wave from earlier contained a strange force that had disrupted her steps, causing her to lose balance. She was immediately pinched up by the green flood, joining it as it tumbled down the stone steps. Zhuo Qingyu's face was now rather pale. She did all she could to stabilize her body, but was unable to gather any Genesis Chi due to being thrashed about by the green flood. In the end, she could only helplessly give up her resistance. An unresigned look filled her eyes, evidently having never considered that she would fail here. However, the moment Zhuo Qingyu gave up, the sound of rushing wind rang out. A stream of white shot towards her, tunneling through the green flood, and wrapping around her tiny slender waist. Zhuo Qingyu looked over in surprise, only to see Zhu Yuan wielding a giant black brush on a stone step nearby. The white hairs at the brush tip had extended, transforming into the white whip that was now grabbing her. Zhu Yuan gritted his teeth as he resisted the battering flood. With a gentle shake, the brush hairs returned, bringing Zhuo Qingyu along as it flew back to the brush. Brush hairs returned to the brush tip, while Zhuo Qingyu's waist agilely twisted as she landed on Zhu Yuan's back. Her fair snow-white wrists tightly wrapping around his neck, a fragrant breath leaving her little red lips. "Are you okay?" Zhu Yuan twisted uncomfortably. The warmth and softness on his back made him feel rather awkward. Zhuo Qingyu was still a little out of it, only gradually coming to her senses a few moments later. She looked towards the side of Zhu Yuan's head with gratitude and said in a soft voice, "Thank you." She knew that Zhu Yuan had taken a huge risk to save her. Once one was caught in the flood, gathering Genesis Chi was almost impossible, meaning one could basically say goodbye to the tower. Zhu Yuan smiled. "You saved Yao Yao, of course I have to save you." Zhuo Qingyu calmed down, immediately regaining her usual temptress character. She giggled charmingly as she exhaled at Zhu Yuan's ear. "I suddenly feel that you're pretty handsome, why not come back with me to the Zhuo clan as my husband?" The corners of Zhu Yuan's mouth twitched. "Can you not be so open?" Zhu Yuan's appearance made Zhuo Qingyu laugh. She lowered her head slightly, her ruddy little mouth cracking open slightly, as she gently bit Zhu Yuan's ear. The warm wetness on his ear almost made Zhu Yuan's legs turn to jelly and fall into the green flood. Hee, here's your reward." Zhuo Qingyu's sly laughter sounded. Her slender body twisted, transforming into a flash of green light, as she dashed away like a fish, stepping once again into the green flood. Zhu Yuan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He gazed upon her leaving figure, and could not help but shake his head. "What a little temptress. I saved you out of the kindness of my heart, and you repay it by teasing me." The appearance of the green wave had sent a good number of geniuses out of the Saint Tower. This caused a shiver to run through everyone's hearts, making them no longer dare to relax. Ascending these stone steps was clearly going to be a lot more difficult than they had imagined. Thus, the subsequent stair climbing grew increasingly difficult for the numerous geniuses. The flood was endless, giant waves forming within it from time to time. Its power could blast apart mountains, which was why Zhu Yuan and the rest needed to concentrate all of their Genesis Qi into defending each time. As such, their rate of Genesis Qi consumption rapidly multiplied. By this time, even the expressions of the apex-level geniuses had become rather ugly. They had already realized that their Genesis Qi would eventually be completely used up if this continued. They raised their heads and gazed upon the stone steps, still no end in sight, as they bitterly cried out in their hearts. When will these steps end? Outside the Saint Remains domain, the 6 envoys watched the scenes within the mirror. At this rate, all of them will reach their limits in 3 instant sticks of time. The 6 envoys were divine-dwelling experts, their sharp and experienced eyes naturally able to accurately approximate everyone's limits with a single glance. It's truly hard to climb these stairs. With regards to the pouring green flood, even the 6 envoys inwardly shook their heads. They knew that if they suppressed their strength to the same level as Wu Huang and the rest, they may not be able to last this long. From this, one could see just how difficult it was to obtain the greatest blessing. Next, we'll see who will be able to endure till the end. Time continued to flow, and 2 incense sticks of time quickly passed. By this time, the original 3 dozen or so had already been cut substantially. Those in the rear were constantly washed away by the flood and sent out of the Saint Tower, leaving only a handful behind. In fact, even the first group of apex-level geniuses were no longer as calm as they had been in the beginning, their bodies no longer as stable. A miserable shriek suddenly sounded from behind. Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yuling were no longer able to hold on, both blown off their feet by a green wave. Amidst their unresigned cries, the 2 were beaten black and blue before ultimately being flung out of the tower. At this point, besides the first group of apex-level geniuses, every other genius that had entered the tower had been wiped out. This cruel scene caused the countless geniuses inside the Saint Remains domain to shiver inside and feel a little fortunate that they had not qualified to enter the tower. The end result for those like them would likely not be pretty. On the stone steps, the apex-level geniuses remaining were still gritting their teeth as they persisted. However, things were not looking optimistic, the surging Genesis Qi around them no longer as resplendent and robust as in the beginning. Luluor could not help but curse with a slightly pale little face, where the heck is the end to these blasted stairs? On her shoulder, Little Frost was also looking a little listless, a sign that it was overworked. Though the others remained silent, they were clearly also cursing at the absurdness of these steps in their hearts. While everyone was inwardly cursing, however, their eyes suddenly widened slightly as they lifted their heads and looked up. Some distance to their front, a wide stone platform floated next to the stairs. What is that? Could we have reached the end? Everyone was uncertain. They carried their bewilderment as they gradually approached the stone platform floating next to the steps. Their gazes swept over, only to find a stone tablet at the center of the platform on which several ancient glowing words were carved. It seems to be a Genesis technique. A rough look was all that was needed for them to vaguely identify it. There are words at the top of the tablet. Zhu Yuan and the rest looked towards the top of the tablet. Sure enough, they saw a line of ancient words. The Saint Stairs has 9 platforms. Those that enter may receive treasures, but they will not be allowed to leave. Everyone read the texts as a thoughtful look was revealed in their eyes. Which is to say there are a total of 9 of these stone platforms. This should be the first one. Entering means getting a treasure, but not allowed to leave would mean that we will not be able to re-enter the Saint Steps. Zhu Yuan's gaze flickered, slightly comprehending the meaning behind those words. This was likely a reward of sorts for those who managed to endure till this point. However, it was also obvious that the stone platforms that appeared later on would have better prizes. All the apex-level geniuses were smart individuals and soon realized this point. Hence, they gritted their teeth, choosing to continue trudging forward instead of entering the stone platforms. These people were prideful individuals. How could they possibly allow themselves to stop here? Therefore, the advance continued. Rumble. Under the unyielding efforts of the apex-level geniuses, they saw another 3 platforms in succession after half an incense stick of time. However, they merely hesitated briefly before unanimously choosing not to enter. All of them wanted to endure just a little longer, so that the blessing they eventually obtained would be even better. Time passed as everyone's footsteps grew heavier than ever. Their pace had slowed to a crawl, as if there was a heavy mountain on each of their backs. The 5th stone platform finally appeared. The Dongxian continent genius, Zhu Ying, was pretty pale. Sweat drenched her body, the feeling almost gone from her legs. Her gaze flickered indeterminately as she stared at the fifth stone platform. In the end, she helplessly sighed, knowing that she had reached her limit. Continuing would only result in being washed away. When that happened, she would be ejected empty-handed. Therefore, she grunted softly as her figure leaped upwards and landed on the stone platform. She obviously did not plan on persisting, changing her focus instead to obtaining the blessing on this stone platform. I've been watching you for a long time. Let us properly settle our grudge from last time. The moment Zhu Ying landed on the fifth platform, Luluo icily snorted and also left the stone steps, landing on the same stone platform. It was not a rash decision made purely out of anger. She too understood her current condition. If she continued, it was very likely that she would not be able to endure till the fourth stone platform. As such, she had to contest for the fifth platform. You? Zhu Ying's gaze turned frosty when she saw Luluo also land on the same platform and sneered. Since you wish for death, I will fulfill your wish. Their actions immediately caused an uproar in the Saint Remains domain, countless gazes beginning to light up with excitement. They are going to fight. Go, little county lord, beat up that woman. The Saint Remains domain blessings belong to our Kangman continent. We cannot allow those Dongxian people even a single one. Voices rose and fell in the Saint Remains domain. Practically everyone was supporting Luluo against the outsider. On the stone steps, Zhu Yuan and the rest paused for a moment, but soon began their climb again. Be careful, Luluo. Zhu Yuan cautioned. Luluo waved a small hand. Relax, I will no longer give the same chance from the previous time. There was nothing more for Zhu Yuan to say. He continued advancing, gradually leaving the fifth stone platform behind. His gaze gradually sharpened. He had a feeling that the most intense phase was about to begin. This video will end here.